Hey everybody. In this video, we're going to stand up a Django project, connect it to a PostgreSQL database, and put that PostgreSQL database in AWS in the cloud. And it's really that simple. It's just those three steps: standing up a Django project, connecting it to Postgres, and putting Postgres in AWS. Now it's good because this tutorial will be beginner friendly. You don't need to know a whole lot about Django in order to get the value out of this video. And it's also useful for advanced programmers because I'll be going through all the best practices like using environment variables, managing AWS resources with Terraform, the scalable, manageable, proper way to really do this. And the video should only take about 20 minutes. And again, by the end of this, you're going to have a production ready database connected to your Django project. Whether it's a new project or one you already have, you'll definitely understand how this works. So without wasting any more time, let's stand up the Django project, connect it to PostgreSQL, and put PostgreSQL in the cloud. Perfect. One small side note before we get started. We're going to spend about 5 minutes standing up a Django project from scratch. If you're savvy with Django and you know how these things work, I'll put a link in the description of the video to start where it really gets interesting. All you need to know how to do is install Python, AWS, the CLI, and Terraform, and then stand up your own Django project, your own virtual environment, and you'll need the Django dependency installed and this one, which allows you to connect to Postgres database. Assuming that you have a Django project with these dependencies installed, just go to the link in the description of this video and shortcut to where this gets interesting. Now, to complete this project, we're going to follow this blog post here, and it's the first link in the description of this video. And before we spin up the project and connect it to an AWS database, we need three key pieces of software. So we need Python 3 so that you can spin up a Django project, of course. We need an AWS account, and we'll want to install the CLI. And we'll want to also install the Terraform CLI, because instead of clicking around in the console on AWS, we're going to define what we want in a Terraform file and then run the script, and everything will get deployed, and it's much more manageable. So for Mac, you just brew install Python 3. I'm going to use Python 3.12 like in this post. And for Windows, you can download it and add it to path. Same thing for the AWS CLI and Terraform. I'll actually open up the docs for these two right now. They're both the same. You just go to your operating system. I like to use the command line installer. It's just these two commands that you run, and then you run which AWS and AWS version, and it should be 2 point whatever. Same thing with Terraform. You just go down, I'm on Mac, you just brew install everything, and you're done. Last, I'll just say you do need to go to AWS and create an account, and it will ask for your credit card, but what we're going to do in this tutorial is basically free, I think. It shouldn't really bill you any amount at all. So just go to sign in, create an account, and assuming that you have an account, you have Python installed, the AWS CLI, and the Terraform CLI, we can start setting up this project. So let's hop to a terminal here and cd into where you want this project. I'll do desktop. So assuming you have Python 3.12, the first thing we want to do is install Django. So I'm going to do Python 3.12-m pip, because we want to run pip to install Django. I already have it, so it's going to take me 1 second. We're done already. And assuming that we have Django in place, now we want to start a Django project. So Python 3.12-m Django, because we want to run Django, start project, and I'm going to call it Django RDS, all one word. I'll click enter. Django RDS is right here. I'll cd into Django RDS, and I'm going to open it in VS Code. You can just drag and drop the folder on VS Code as well. It's just as easy. Now, if you're new to Python, we're going to spin up a virtual environment, which is essentially a folder where you can put all of the dependencies. So let's say you have one project that has an old version of Django, another project that has a new version of Django. How are you going to manage all of these Django versions on your laptop? Wouldn't it be convenient if you just had a folder where you can say, okay, for this project, I'm running this version of Django, this version of Python, this version of this version of that, and you have it on a per project basis. That's what virtual environments do. It's super easy. So let's stand one up. We'll open up the terminal, and we will stand up a Python 3.12 virtual environment. by running -m venv for virtual environment, and we'll call it my venv. So you can see that folder just got created, as we said, and we'll activate it now. So you just run source myvenv/bin/activate. And you can see that we're now running with that Python virtual environment. And if I run python-v, you can see it's now 312 by default. Perfect. So now we'll run pip install. Let's upgrade pip to start. And then let's install Django again. We also want to install the connector for Django to PostgreSQL, which is in this blog post here. So if we scroll down, they actually have the full command. So we'll copy and paste this one to start. And then after this, we want to save it to a requirements.txt file because it's best practices. If you deploy this to the cloud and the cloud needs to reinstall everything, you want to write down to a file exactly what it needs to install. So let's do that now by running pip freeze into a requirements file. So copy and paste that too, click enter, and now we have our requirements file as well. Perfect. So now we have a Django project stood up, and we also have the dependencies installed in our virtual environment. Now what we want to do is configure the settings to connect to PostgreSQL, and then we want to stand up that PostgreSQL database in the cloud. So let's just do that right now. So if we hop back here, you can see actually that we can run these Django commands, which we don't need. Let's see where the settings are. The settings are here. So let's go into Django RDS settings. So for those who don't know, the settings file helps you configure your Django project. So are you running in production? What's your secret key? What databases would you like to connect to? Are you connected to other services like S3 or a mailing service? This is where all these things live. So you can see secret key, debug. Let's go to databases because we want to change our database to PostgreSQL. So let's delete this and come over here, and we're going to create a database object for PostgreSQL. Right? You can see PostgreSQL right here. So let's copy it and paste it. Now we're pulling in all of the values to connect to our database as environment variables, right? Operating system.getEnv for get environment variable, and then our database name, our username and password to log into that database, the host where it lives, in our case will be AWS, and then the port, which for PostgreSQL is always 5432. So let's import OS as well, because we clearly need it here as a dependency. And now what we should do is we should get our AWS credentials and actually spin up one of these databases so we can fill in one of these values. And it's really that simple. You just stand up a database, or you stand up a Django project. You say you want to connect to this type of PostgreSQL database. You go to AWS and you stand it up and you connect it all by filling out these values, and you're done. So let's stand up a Terraform file, define what type of database we want, and then connect everything. Before we use Terraform to spin up all our resources in AWS, it's good to have an idea of exactly what we want to create beforehand. So a good way to do this is you can use Eraser to use AI to generate a diagram of exactly what you want. So in plain text, I explain exactly what I want. I want a publicly accessible database on AWS with a route table from any host on the internet into our database over port 5432. So it's going to take a second to generate. And this is our final diagram right here. So starting from the top, we're going to need a VPC on AWS, which is a virtual private cloud. And that allows you to create a network for the internet to access. You can't spin up a database without one. And then the first thing that we need is an internet gateway. The internet gateway allows you to interface your VPC with the World Wide Web. So we'll stand up a VPC, we'll put an internet gateway inside, and then we'll configure route tables into our subnets. Now, every single resource has to live inside of a subnet, inside of a VPC. I know there's a lot of overhead here, but it has to be done if you're going to configure things on AWS. So again, VPC, Internet Gateway to interface with the World Wide Web. We're going to create some rules to assign to subnets. You need 2 in order to spin up an RDS database service. So we'll call them subnet 1 and subnet 2. And then we'll create a security group for that database allowing access, Postgres access over TCP from these 2 subnets and any type of traffic back out into the World Wide Web. I understand this sounds complicated, but as you begin to spin up more and more AWS resources, you will understand why each component matters. And in order for AWS to be super powerful, it has to provide a lot of these primitive services you have to build like Lego blocks. So don't worry if this sounds super complicated. We'll spin up everything in Terraform and explain it in plain English. And then when we run apply, this whole diagram is going to get created in real life and we can connect our Django project to it. So let's do that right now. So to spin up all the resources we need in AWS, we're going to need to create a Terraform file. And by default, it should be called main.tf. Now you can see I have this little purple icon here. In order to get that yourself, go to the extensions in VS Code and install Terraform. And it's the top one by Anton with a ton of downloads. Cool. Assuming you have that Terraform extension in place, we can start going back to this blog post, copy and pasting component by component, and explaining every single line. So the first thing we need is we need a provider. So Terraform can integrate with Google Cloud, it can integrate with AWS, it can integrate with a ton of things. So we need to tell Terraform, this is an AWS project. We're going to be spinning up AWS resources. And we just need to define our region as US East 1, because that's where I'm located. If you're in Europe or if you're on the West Coast, there are different regions on AWS. Just look up AWS regions and pick whichever one you want. But this is the default one. The second thing we need is that VPC to isolate all of our infrastructure. So if you come back here, we can create a resource. It's called AWS_VPC, and we'll name it default. Now I'm going to take a sidestep here, and I'm going to show you all of the resources that AWS has in the Terraform docs. So AWS_VPC resource documentation. And it's going to be the first result on Google. And not only will this show you different examples of VPCs and every possible value you can put inside of a VPC, all the parameters here, but it will also show you all of the AWS resources that you can connect to. So VPC resources, and you can see hundreds of different products, different subproducts for each one. So usually the best practices with Terraform is to understand your project, learn about each different product that AWS has to offer, and then create a diagram from scratch, like using Eraser and the AI generated one. And then from that, maybe with ChatGPT, you can have an iterative approach of spinning up a couple resources, making sure Terraform does it properly and validating it, and then adding bit by bit until you have all of the products you need in order to make your service work. So let's do that workflow here. So first of all, we have our provider AWS, and we're spinning up an AWS VPC. Our network range is going to be a wide range of IPs, and we're going to enable DNS host names because we want that database to have a host name per the settings right here. Cool, and we'll call it Django RDS VPC. Now let's bring in a few more things. Let's create that internet gateway so that we can interface with the World Wide Web. So resource AWS_internet gateway, call it default. We'll associate it with that VPC and we'll give it a name. And then the last thing let's do is let's create 2 subnets and the route table. So the route table gives us control for all traffic leaving the VPC, which is of course necessary if we want our database to connect back to our computer here or our Django project. So resource AWS route table, default, we have to give it the VPC ID that it's going to live inside. The CIDR block allowing for all access from the VPC out to any host on the internet. That's why it's all zeros here. And then we associate it with that internet gateway by passing it the ID, and we give it a name. Cool. The last thing we'll do is create those two subnets, subnet 1 and subnet 2, in different availability zones. So if you just copy and paste those two, it's an AWS subnet resource. We'll call it subnet 1 and subnet 2. They both live inside this VPC. They have a sub-range of IPs, so it'll be 10.01 and anything after that. And we'll call the other one 10.02 and anything after that. And then we'll put the availability zones as US East B and US East A, and we'll give them two different names. Now, before we keep putting more stuff in, we've just created a subnet, an internet gateway, a route table, and two subnets. Let's see what this would look like if we try to spin it up on AWS right now. So first, let's run Terraform init, because we need to install all of the dependencies for the AWS provider to work. And you can see that it's done that right here. Terraform provider, AWS, and it's this long file. We can't read it. Now we can start running Terraform plan and Terraform apply. Now, if you haven't already, little sidestep, if you haven't authenticated the AWS CLI and the Terraform CLI, we're going to have to do that right now. So to do that, head back over to AWS. So I'll open it in a new tab and go to security credentials right here. And you're going to be able to create access keys. I've already created the maximum amount, but all you have to do is click this button here and you'll get a key ID and you'll get a secret key, and just store that somewhere on your computer. And then you can run Terraform auth and you can run the AWS auth as well. And it's going to give you a series of prompts where you paste in that ID, you paste in that secret key. And then when you run Terraform apply, it's going to know that it's under this account and it's going to spin up resources within your project. So I've already done that now. You're a smart person. I'm sure you can figure out how to authenticate two CLIs. So let's run Terraform plan now. And this will show you, if we were to run it, what would get set up. And you can see that we're going to plan to add 5 new things, right? That VPC, internet gateway, route table, 2 subnets. And you can see all the details here. And then let's run Terraform apply. And we'll enter yes. That's going to take a few seconds to run because it's literally going to AWS to spin everything up. It seems to be working. So let's go to AWS. In our project, go to VPC. And we should be able to see under your VPCs, the Django RDS VPC is available. And if we go to subnets, perfect, we see subnet 1 and subnet 2, and we should see a route table as well, and an internet gateway. So it's working. Now all we have to do is we have to spin up a database, a security group for the database, a subnet for the database, and connect it all. And then we should be able to connect it in Django. So let's create 2 route table associations, associating the subnet with the route table so that those routes for allowing all internet access out exist on these subnets. So let's copy and paste these. Then we need to create that subnet group for the database, create that AWS security group. So let's do these 2 now. Security group for RDS allows PostgreSQL traffic. So you can see, well, let's explain them both. So a subnet group allows you to associate the subnets with the security group for our database. So you can see that we're saying these are the subnets, this is the name, and you can see that we're referencing that in here. And then with the security group, you can see that we're leaning on that VPC, this is the Django security group. We're going to allow all Postgres traffic in, and then any type of traffic out. -1 for any type of protocol, all zeros for any type of host. And it's called allow all. And then last, what we want to do is we want to create this database instance inside of that security group and that subnet group. So you can see the subnet group, security group, and subnet group. And one thing you'll see is we give it the database name, the username, and the password. And we're defining the password as a variable because we don't want to store it in our project. That would be insecure. So let's define this variable. So it's the password for the database description, it's a string, and it's sensitive. And then let's copy this database instance. Great. So you can see that we're spinning up a Postgres database. It's a Postgres 16 database. The type of hardware we're going to use is a T3 micro, which is free, I think. The identifier will be called Django RDS. This is the database name. This is the username. This is the password to connect. And once we get the host name too, those are the final values once this database is spun up that we need to put into Django to connect everything. So let's run terraform apply, and I'm going to run --auto--approve. And this allows us to not have to enter yes every single time. Now, the database, we need to put in a password. I'm going to put in a silly password, but you should pick something very secure and store it in a secure place. Now, this is going to take like 4 minutes to run, so we'll meet up after it's done. So you can see after about 3.5 minutes, the script is complete. So if we go into AWS, we should be able to see that Postgres database up and running. So if we head to RDS and we go to databases, you see my Django RDS, and you should see all the details for it. So it's a micro, it's got the name that we said, and now you can find that port and that host that we can put into Django. So let's hop back to Django. If we go into settings, right, we need the database name, we need the username, the password, and the host. And we should pass them in as environment variables. So if we go into my virtual environment, bin activate, we should be able to export these variables at the end. So export, and then the database name equals some value. We'll need the DB username, and then it's DB user password, and then it's the DB host. Cool. So let's enter these values. So in our main.terraform, our database name was Django RDS DB. Because I wrote this tutorial, the username to log in is Adam. I wrote a really silly password. Hopefully yours is better than this one. And then for the host, we just need to copy and paste this value. Awesome. So now if we go into the settings here, we are connected to an entirely new database. Before we start running scripts, we should reactivate this virtual environment. So just run deactivate, my venv is gone, and then just run source my venv bin activate. That reruns the script with these variables in place. So now we can run this Django database. So let's run manage.py migrate, and it should create the database migration for users in that table on AWS. This is good news. The fact that we're getting OKs is really good news. Great. Now we can create a super user. So mine's Adam Lamore, fakeemail.com. Let's give it my laptop password. Actually, no, we'll just do something stupid. Sure. Okay, user is created successfully. Now, if we run this Django project, manage.py run server, you can see that this project is up and running. And if we go and try to log in, as that user we just created, we should be authenticated. Perfect. And this entire connection is ran by that host on AWS. So the last thing I just want to show you is if you want to spin down these resources, you just run terraform destroy, enter a value for the database. Just remember that value. It's going to ask us to confirm, so we enter yes, or you could pass that auto approve variable like last time, and it will spin everything down. And we're good to go. So this is an example of spinning up a Django project, connecting it to Postgres, and then putting that Postgres database on the cloud, just writing Terraform instead of manually clicking around the console and spinning up all these things and chaotically managing it. So this is simple for everybody to follow, hopefully, and it follows all the best security practices and cloud engineering practices when spinning up a database. There'll be other videos on this stuff in the future, and if you have any comments or questions, just leave a comment. Much appreciated.